You might have worked with React Native for quite some time, but do you really know all the ins and outs? There's some really small nuggets of wisdom in the React Native docs or from the day-to-day use that I want to share with you, so here are 10 practical tips that you can use in your next React Native project. The first one is a real quick one about lists and something I shared before. If you have an input here and you want to hide that keyboard, there's a simple thing that you can add to your list. So I'm using a flat list here, and you can now simply go ahead and add the keyboard dismiss mode and set it to on drag. As a result, I can drag the list and it will automatically close the hardware keyboard whenever I do the drag. Additionally, by the way, you can also quickly make this a really cool animated list. So I can add and remove things, but let's just change this to an animated flat list from React Native Reanimated. And then let's add the item layout animation and let's import the linear transition. So now I should be able to have a smooth transition whenever I remove items or add items with just 2 little changes to an animated flat list and the item layout animation, and I can also on swipe close my keyboard. The second tip is about the Pressable component. In most of my tutorials, you're going to see me use the touchable opacity, which works great as a button replacement. However, if you're looking for a more extensive and future-proof way to handle touch-based input, check out the Pressable API. And if you go into the Pressable, you see that there's a lot more fine-tuning you can do, like on press in, on press out, where you can change the state of your components. Let's do a quick example. I will just change these items, which are currently touchable opacity item, to a pressable. And instead of just using styles item, I can actually now use a function where I use the pressed state and use that to set either the opacity or, for example, the background color. And you can even use this pressed state inside the child values here, where I currently have the text of the pressable component. As a result, I can now fine-tune exactly how the click event on that button and how especially the press event works instead of just using a touchable opacity. Tip number 3 is about dark modes and the appearance of our application. Did you know that you can simply wrap your application using the theme provider from React Navigation and then include the default theme and the dark theme to automatically style the elements from React Navigation? So in this case, you're going to see that both the status bar, the top area up here, and even the background here, because it's using the default background color, are changing once I switch the colors here in the simulator. This works because we use the use color theme hook from React Native, which then updates the color theme to either light or dark, and this is applied here in our check wrapped around our application. You can then also drill this down on component level. So whenever you want, you can simply import the color theme and use it as a state to set different styles on your elements. And if you manually want to toggle this, you can use the appearance API and the set color theme to manually save this. This works nice in combination with something like async storage or MMKV, so you can then manually on-click toggle this. However, in the simulator, this usually fails, especially when I don't hit save. So now it should work, and I can instantly and easily switch between light and dark mode in my app. Tip number 4 is once again about colors. This time it's about using platform and the platform color API in the application. So here's a view with 3 different buttons. And if I go to that same view on my Android emulator, you're gonna see for some reason they look different. And the reason is that you can use both platform select to switch between different platforms. You can actually not only have, oh, come on, please stay open. Come on, stay open. You can not only, this is not possible, not only switch between iOS and Android, but also Windows, macOS, web, or native. And then you can supply specific colors in your style sheet, and you can not only have fixed colors, but you can also see the platform color here. This is a bit more complicated to use, especially figuring out the values for Android is somewhat hard. You have to get into the Android documentation. But if you're interested in this, you can actually use the system colors of both iOS and Android if you want a complete and even more native feeling in your application. Tip 5 is about fonts, and especially Google fonts. Did you know that there's an Expo package that you can use that you can simply install and then use all the fonts of Google? Let's check it out. I've added the package for the Frank Rule Libre font to my application, to the layout, and I also used the use fonts hook to safely, in the beginning of my application, load all the custom fonts that I want to use. I would usually use a use effect and make sure fonts loaded is ready, but nonetheless, I can now use them on my page inside of the font family, and as a result, we see here the bold and the medium one being applied. It has never been easier to use Google Fonts in your React Native application than this, trust me. Tip number 6 is about images. When you use the image component and you're loading something over the network, for example, a really big image like this, it can sometimes take time. So if I go here, it takes a millisecond, and there are sometimes images that are even bigger. Now, what you can do is you can actually specify a default source. And within that default source, you basically set the image that should be displayed while the first image is loading. So if I had it like this now, I could go into the component and you quickly saw that React Native image. So I just used my local image because that one should be instantly available. You could also have like a simple loader in there as the default source. That would work as well. And then you can use any kind of big image, and while it's loading, just by default, you display your default source in the image element. Tip number 7 is about the text element. If you have a very long text in your application, there are different ways to improve this. So the first way, if you're rendering really long text, is of course have this in a scroll view, but sometimes you also want to limit the number of lines. So you can do number of lines on the text element. Let's set this to 5, and this will automatically render only 5 lines, and at the end you're gonna have 3 dots. So you don't need any logic. If text length is bigger than 120, then render 3 dots or something. No, you can just set the number of lines. However, if you at the same time also want to still show all the things of your text, because now the text of course truncated, you could add a property called adjust font size to fit. As a result, this looks quite interesting because in our example, well, 8 lines is probably not enough, but now we would be able to actually fit all of this in 20 lines of text. Remember, this was our initial state, and now we would be able to render all of that using adjust font size to fit, which will simply specify whether font should be scaled down automatically to fit given style constraints. This is not always helpful, but it can be a nice fix in some of your applications. Tip number 8 is about warnings in your application. So I recently came across a warning that was, well, not too interesting to me. Let's say you got this one, which of course doesn't come up when I want to show it. So encounter 2 children with the same name. Of course, that is something you definitely want to fix. However, sometimes there are things that you just want to ignore because they keep appearing, especially if you maybe do a presentation for your customer. What you can do is you can simply import Lockbox from React Native. We don't need these fences, that looks interesting. And now I could go ahead and use Lockbox. And I got 2 or different ways. I could ignore all locks, or I could ignore specific locks. So in my case, what I want to ignore is probably encountered 2 children with the same key. I can now hit save, and let's do a reload again. And I go into 8, and boom, no more locks. And of course, the same would work if I would use lockbox.ignore all locks. That's probably a bit more dangerous because it would hide anything that pops up in your application. So anyway, treat this carefully, but if you want some mind space, some quiet applications, and nothing that pops up while you work on your application, simply use Lockbox to control the locks that appear in your React Native app. Tip number 9 is about API usage, and I was kind of shocked when I saw it. So I was using a local API, on localhost port 8080, and we see I have a simple block here where I fetch my data from API URL/test, and it worked perfectly fine on iOS. However, on Android, I get an error fetching data. Why is that the case? Well, it turns out that localhost doesn't work on the Android emulator. You're gonna have a bad day. What you can do as a result is you can add this little block at the top, which is kind of ugly, but if you put all of your API calls usually in 1 or 2 files into your custom hooks, that should be easy to treat. So in my case, I grab the environment using the node environment to make sure we're actually running in development. And if we're running in development and the platform is Android, I exchange and patch my API URL, which I usually got from my process environment. So instead of using localhost port 8080, I'm now using 10.0.2.2 8080. Let's hit save and let's check out my emulator again. So if I now go into page 9, voila, we have fixed this and we can make API calls to localhost on both iOS and Android. Just as a quick addition to this, because this might be an ugly hack, Here's something else that's recommended. So you can also map your port using ADB, or down here for ADB devices, you can map the port specifically for your emulator. That's probably a tiny bit better than having additional code, but if you just want to do a quick test, this one will get the job done. Tip number 10 is for all of you who want to build a production application of your React Native application using Expo. So usually you're going to see you have your own custom dev client. Even if you do a pre-build, it only works when your live reload is up and running. But sometimes you just want to have the app installed and leave the room and show it to someone else. What you can do to build this kind of standalone application is, once you have created your pre-build with Expo, go into Xcode, go up here, hit Edit Scheme, and under Run Configuration, here for the build configuration, you want to select Release. Go ahead with that, build the application for your device, and there's no more connection to a local server. Additionally, you can of course do the same for Android, so open your project up with Android Studio, and then at the bottom left, you're gonna really small find something called Build Variants. Inside of Build Variants, you see that everything here is set to debug. And of course, for our app, I can now change this to release. It will change all of these to release, and then I can go up here and deploy the app to either my simulator or of course any kind of connected Android device. Alright, that brings us to the end of this quick video. I hope you enjoyed this quick run through of 10 different things that I picked up over the years. I took note of them. I probably will do another video once I reach more than 5 or 10 nodes again in the future, but let me know in the comments, what is something that you figured out after years of using React Native, or you were like, why didn't I know that earlier? Leave a comment down below, and of course also, if you enjoyed that build process step that I showed you last, here's a video about all the ways how you can build your application with Expo, including pre-builds, EAS, and everything you need to know. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button, and I will catch you in the next one. So until then, happy coding, Simon.